Welcome everyone to Underserved episode 53. Today we are featuring Mike Sheldon, CTO of Red Rover. Let's get started.
Welcome to this week's edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry, where we focus on stories of tech industry leaders, their insights, and their lessons learned. And now, your host, Andrew Jelina.
Hey, good morning, Mike. Thank you for joining us on Underserved.
Thanks, Andrew. It's good to be here. Looking forward to talking with you.
Absolutely. So you got an early start, right? Your dad had a 8086 when you were back in preschool?
I did. He had the 8086 set up in the basement, and he would let me punch the keys, put in the 5 1/4 floppy disks, and play Pac-Man or Funnels and Buckets, to name a few throwback games.
And then you continued playing around and learning more in elementary school?
Yes, I was always tinkering with the computer whenever I had the chance. And as many kids my age did, I would collect baseball cards, basketball cards, kind of in the heyday of those collections. And I wanted to organize mine in different ways. So I actually got into Access on my dad's laptop and started building a relational database without really knowing what I was doing. But it was just kind of fun to have things linked together and organized, and did that for a while until I got sick of doing the data input.
So in junior high, did you get a beefier computer?
Yeah, so had the old 8086. I think we might have had a 386 in there somewhere. But when I got into junior high, that was just as dial-up internet was becoming kind of mainstream. And we got a Gateway 2000 Pentium 100 megahertz computer, which was awesome at the time. We thought it was great with the 15-inch CRT monitor and the Windows jingle at the beginning when it would start up. That was the computer that I really got introduced to programming on. Was walking through an Office Depot and said, hey, I'll grab that Visual Basic in 24 hours book, and just started kind of going through it on my own and working through the projects, and really loved the idea of making the computer do what I told it to do. And it just made a lot of sense to me.
I worked my way through a couple Sam's 24-hour books myself. And when you buy it, you're like, oh, 24 hours, that's a day. But no, it's 24 one-hour lessons that you have to practice.
Right. It's 24 hours of reading, maybe, and then a whole bunch more hours of actually doing and tinkering and playing. But the format was great for a beginner. It really kind of met my need.
Absolutely. So in high school, what did you end up doing?
Yeah, so from there, I kind of had a little database background, a little bit of programming, used some of that doing Access macros and things on the side for fun. But then my youth pastor and mentor was starting a company, and he and his partner hired me on as an intern in high school to just browse the web looking for email addresses of prospects that we could try and get to use our system. Eventually, they let me exercise some of those programming skills that I had been working on and write some ASP code, old VB script, and even a little bit of SQL, which I had no idea that SQL was what was behind Access until then. But really just kind of learning on the job in a tiny little startup environment. And that story was kind of the beginning of where my career would go.
What was the name of your mentor?
So that was Mike Blackstone. He was a full-time businessman and I think full-time youth pastor at the same time. Didn't get paid for working at the church, but just had a real heart for the teens. And I connected with him, as did many other students in my classes. And just a great all-around guy. Taught me a lot about integrity, about business, about just living life.
So then after that, you end up going to university at Drexel?
Yes. So I ended up at Drexel and did one of my internships. I call them co-ops. So I ended up at Drexel and did one of my co-ops there with QVC, much, much bigger environment than what I had experienced at Frontline, which was the startup company that Mike and his partner had started. And realized that I had a decent amount of experience actually writing production code that they weren't ready for an intern to have. I would complete assignments in a couple hours and say, what's next? And they'd say, well, we're planning that next Tuesday. So actually on that job, fully known to my manager, I was working on correspondence history courses and other things to move my degree along. But yeah, so at Drexel, learned a lot from the professors there. Great experience with the co-op program. But I actually didn't finish before I started working full-time back at Frontline again.
And you went there with an agreement, hey, I'm going to finish college, but let's do this.
Right. So it was about 2004. They reached out to me and said, hey, we're looking for someone to join the team and help take care of the system that they had built over the past couple of years that I had helped build as an intern. And they wanted to add somebody to the team to take care of that while they were starting to re-platform and look at entering other verticals. The system started out as a sub-placement system for education, K through 12 school districts around the country. And they said, we can do this for coaches and referees and light industrial labor. Let's try and expand our footprint. So that project was ticking up in 2004. They brought me in because they had seen something in me when I was interning, and with the agreement that I would finish my degree, started working there full time in 2004.
And I think that's when you had a story about a SQL DTS package going awry.
Yes, it was in that kind of year between college and graduating from college. Was working full time at Frontline, and I was going to do a deployment. We were using SQL DTS packages to push out new database code. And if anybody's used DTS in the past, one of the biggest UX mistakes that I think anybody's ever made was by default, the drop associated objects was checked on. So you would run the DTS package, and if you had a stored procedure in there that referenced a table and you executed without turning that checkbox off, yep, it dropped the table first. And lo and behold, I did that. The stored procedure referenced the admin table, and we had no admins that could log in until we could restore the database from tape backup.
That's a painful lesson, but I bet it never happened again.
Nothing quite that bad, but when you're building software and trying to be agile, these things happen, and everybody has their war stories. They're fun to tell in retrospect. And, there's a fine line between being extra careful not to make those mistakes and taking the little bit of risk to get value to customers quickly. So that's something that I've tried to fine tune throughout my career and really preach with my team, that we're willing to take some risks. Be careful. Don't repeat mistakes. Put safeguards in place when you can, but don't put so many safeguards in place that we can't deliver value quickly.
Now, did your experience in doing a co-op and even starting full-time before you even graduated, did that change how you looked at folks that you hire or make you consider folks differently?
Yeah, I realized that I learned a lot at college. It was good for me. I refer back to certain classes for sure. But at the same time, I realized that the biggest skill that I want to hire for is somebody who is a learner, somebody who can adapt as technology changes. Because the stuff that I did in college as far as technology goes is antiquated at this point. But that ability to see patterns, adapt, adjust, learn new things is something that every good developer needs to have. And those are the types of people that I want on my team.
Now, around this time, I think that's also when you got married as well, and your friends had an unconventional way to invite you to your bachelor party.
Yeah, so I was working full-time at Frontline and was about to get married in 2005. I was actually at my fiance's parents' house. We were having dinner, or supposed to have dinner, when I got a call from my boss, frantic, that the system was down and we need you to fix it. And I'm like, why? Why do you need me to fix it? There's other people on the team. Why is it so important that it's me right now? So I tried to log on, but I couldn't get in remotely. Again, this was 2005, so remote connections, broadband was not all there. So they said, you have to get in here. I asked, well, what kind of error is it? Is it, this kind of error or that kind of error? And my boss responded, well, it's that kind of error. I said, well, that's not me. That's somebody else's problem. He said, no. They're saying it's this kind of error. You need to get in here. I said, okay, whatever. So I drove over to the office, as quickly as legally possible and got in there. Some other people were there. They rushed me into my office a certain direction. What's going on? Sat down, started to troubleshoot. About 2 minutes later, people just start filing by my office door who don't belong there. They're all friends, people from church, people from school. And they had actually manufactured real errors in the system to get me into the office so they could surprise me for my bachelor party.
Well, that was awfully nice.
It was. And Mike Blackstone, who I had mentioned earlier, was my best man. So he had the office and everything set up. And then we got married in June of 2005. And it was actually the same day that I could have walked for my diploma at Drexel. I decided that standing at the end of the aisle in the church, getting married was a better idea.
Yeah, you chose well.
You are listening to the Underserved podcast. Underserved is produced by Syrinx, the developer-founded, developer-run software consulting company. For more information, visit syrinx.com. That's SYRINX.com.
So, Frontline education, you're all in with them, you're full-time. What are things like back then?
So, when I joined in 2004, like I said, they were building kind of the next generation platform. And the idea was that I would join that team while kind of taking care of support requests and other things on the existing platform. It quickly became evident that the business was growing on the education side, and we needed to keep building that education platform. So I was given the option of, hey, do you want us to hire somebody to take care of the education platform and you can be part of the team building the new platform? Or do you want to lead the effort on the education platform and we'll hire some people to augment the team on the new stuff we're building? By that point, I had been working for months, if not years, on the education platform and decided, you know what, I like what I'm doing. And I'm going to stay all in on the old platform, knowing that there would be a path to the new platform if that ever became a thing. But it wasn't really a technology choice for me. I describe myself as not a technologist, but rather a product person who just likes to program and likes using technology to solve problems. So the fact that I was taking a step back from a technology standpoint using ASP, at that point, .NET 1.1 was kind of the hot thing that was coming out in the Microsoft stack, and stepped back into the role. And I actually led the team solo for 2 or 3 years before we even hired another developer. I was product manager, I was developer, and I was support developer, third line support. It all kind of fell on my shoulders. So I got a taste of what it looked like to be solo startup entrepreneur for a little while.
Now, a lot of developers I know would have jumped at the new technology, new development route, and like you said, chased the shiny new object. How did it work out for you from a business perspective? Like, what happened to the two product lines?
So the development went on for the new platform for probably 3 or so more years, but the business side really had a hard time finding market fit. And eventually that end of the business was folded up and we doubled down on the education side of the business. So I ended up picking well from what part of the business was successful. Still got to work with all the same guys, great group of guys that were mentors to me, leading up to those college years, even through the college years. And I say I worked solo. That's partially true, but I had the support of a great organization around me, including a guy named Tom Vilbert, who was one of my early mentors. He was the architect at Frontline, didn't really have the title, but he was the top technical dog on the team. And he has a great way of mentoring, a great way of explaining things to the business folks and trying to simplify concepts and technical things. He also has a lot of experience with systems like SAP, with concurrent programming and race conditions and SQL, just an all-around talented guy. And in fact, he works for me now. So we haven't been able to get away from each other in one capacity or another for the past 20 years.
Yeah, you see that a lot when people like working together, respect one another. They end up at place after place after place together.
I even see that sometimes watching movies and stuff. You see the same cast coming together in different roles. Christopher Nolan seems to have his selection of actors that he likes to work with.
Yeah, Quentin Tarantino.
Yep.
See the same folks in a lot of his films. So you don't say solo forever. I imagine if things are going well on the business end, you end up having to grow the team eventually.
Yeah, so we added one and then another developer, still operated kind of in the same way, very low process, working very closely with a guy named Larry Fox, who was in charge of the client services department and really is the other half of my product manager. He has a great insight into what the customers are trying to do, what they need, and the two of us working together could determine what is it that we need to build to meet those needs. So myself, a couple other developers, Larry and his team continued to grow that product for several years from 2005 onward until we got to about 2010. And we had continued to grow the team. I was in a lead developer role at that point, and we were looking at the giant pile of ASP and SQL stored procedures that had been built up over the years and said, we really should modernize some of this. So we started an effort to replatform the system, which was an interesting architectural exercise because we wanted to do it piecemeal. So we had to leave the data model in place. Many of the things that we had learned that the data model wasn't perfect for, we had to try and work around. And then build, new application logic and new front end for the pieces of the system and try and stitch those things together, but do it quickly before the funding ran out or the interest ran out on that replatforming effort. So that was an interesting challenge. Got a couple of years into that 2010 to 2014 timeframe when Frontline actually got bought by Insight Venture Partners with a mind towards really growing the business through acquisition of other ed tech companies.
Now, during that time frame, like 05 to 10, I think you were exposed to Agile for the first time and initially weren't a huge fan.
Right. So I had grown up in an environment, didn't really know much other than being very agile, lowercase a, responding to customer needs, deploying on a regular basis, not much process, not much documentation, and just delivering customer value as quickly as we could. So a lot of the concepts that drove the agile movement were already familiar to me. And when it was introduced into the company, the first thing that agile trainers do is introduce you to all of the ceremonies and the process. And these are the things that we have to do. And this is how we write down things. And this is how we track things. And I'm like, that feels very not agile to me because I was so used to what I've come to call nimble development, even more lightweight than agile. So I was not a fan at first. I went along with it, but kind of became a student of what is the reason behind the capital A agile movement. Where are they trying to move things? And started to recognize the difference between waterfall that I had very limited exposure to and how the agile processes were moving those organizations much in the right direction. and also larger teams where you have a larger degree of talent and experience that you could kind of normalize and measure the teams in a way using those processes, using those metrics. But it still felt wrong to me. I was so used to that nimble, rapid, unstructured environment that we could move so quickly, and sitting in scrum meetings and doing story point poker just felt like it was dragging the heart and soul out of me.
Thank you so much for joining this Zoom panel interview for our software development position. My apologies for having to reschedule it 7 times.
Hey, no worries. Ready to get this underway.
Let me introduce the panel members from our company. First is...
Whoever that is, can you please mute?
Sorry, that was me. Mailman's here.
Hey, you guys hear me? You see me? My kid is playing Fortnite and my bandwidth is sapped.
Hey, sorry, I was on mute. Hi, this is Connor Walton.
Can everyone who is not talking please mute yourself?
Sorry, so where were we?
Yeah, so the main reason I joined was to let you know that I accepted a job offer from your competitor this morning. Sorry, your process just took too long. Laters.
Does this drill sound all too familiar to you? If so, you should call Syrinx. Syrinx helps you complete your projects on time and on budget. So stop the Zoom calls and start shipping code today. Call us at 888-579-7469 option 1 or email us at sales@syrinx.com. That's sales@syrinx.com.
Yeah, a lot of folks, when they're adopting Agile, the high-end superstars on the team will feel like they're being pulled back a little bit. And that normalization you talked about, maybe it's also helping some of the regular developers perform at a higher level. So it kind of smooths out the curve some. But yeah, you got to keep the superstars from getting bored or frustrated.
Right. So one of the things that I always dreamed of is building a team around the superstars, or I even like to refer to them more as all-stars, right? So superstars stand out on their own. All-stars, you look at an all-star team and how they work together. One of my favorite movie references is Disney's Miracle on Ice, talking about the Olympic hockey team back in the 80s, that the coach actually got rid of all of the superstars, all of the best players that should have been on the team, and then rebuilt the team with members that could work together and that were all on the same page and were willing to work with the system that the coach was putting forth. And I look at my role now as a leader as kind of the coach of the team. I want to not be managing each member of the team, but identifying how all of the individual talents work together and just pointing people in the right direction to make things happen and happen well.
The sum of the system greater than the sum of the individuals.
Right. And the Agile Manifesto talks about some of that stuff. People over process being one of the 4 pillars there. I think that's absolutely key. The more you can focus on the people, the better off you're going to be as a team delivering software.
All right, so Frontline gets acquired by Insight Venture Partners. They, like most firms, want to roll up a whole bunch of folks through acquisition and, again, make something where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So you must be doing acquisitions left and right.
Yep. The approach and the strategy that Insight brought, that Frontline was even looking at before Insight came in, was to start acquiring other companies that were doing ed tech in the kind of HCM space for education. And as part of that, I got moved from a lead role, the absence management product, to an architect role, and started looking at, okay, as we bring in new companies, how do we make them work together? Right? That's the technology utopia, is you acquire all of these disparate systems and they all just talk and are friendly and have one great user experience. I don't know that anybody has actually ever achieved that, and we were no exception, but we made some valiant efforts toward that. Ultimately, we did probably 10 acquisitions in the next 3 years. And eventually the company sold for over $1 billion. So on many measures, it was a great success. I know from my standpoint, I learned a lot about company growth, about acquisitions, learned a lot about architecture and how teams and architecture and business kind of interact and work together and influence one another.
Between people, processes, and systems, which were the hardest to integrate in those 10 acquisitions?
So the people from a tech side weren't too hard. Technologists, like I said, tend to be learners. They're willing to adjust. Processes, I don't know that we ever fully found our stride with Agile. And just as you kept growing and growing, we went safe and tried this and tried that. And probably the experience of most organizations, right? You never fully land, and there's a continuous learning aspect to it. Technologies, extremely difficult. There's just no way around the fact that you have 5, 10 systems that were built by independent teams over the last decade. They're not really set up to be brought together technically without a significant investment. And of course, that's always a challenge to make that case from a technology side of, hey, I know you just bought this thing for several $1 million. I need several $1 million more to make it work together.
That's not in the budget, Mike.
Right. That wasn't part of the business plan. And my response was, well, why didn't you ask me before you bought the company? But that is the technologist's fate in most acquisitions, I think, unless you work for Google or Facebook.
So sounds like it might be time to move on from Frontline. What do you end up doing after that?
Yeah. So, hearkening back to my early internship with QVC, Frontline was now becoming a larger company, not quite the size of QVC, but it was getting less comfortable for me. While I was learning a lot, I understood a lot more now about companies and how things change as they get bigger than I did when I was in college. But I yearned for that small team, startup, entrepreneurial environment again. And I always had a bent towards entrepreneurship beyond technology. When I was a kid in lower elementary school, I would walk around the neighborhood and collect aluminum cans from all the neighbors, and always loved the times when the one neighbor would have a big party and I'd get a whole trash can full of beer cans. Of course, I'd have to hold my nose as a little kid walking around the rest of the block because the bag stunk. But always looking for business opportunities. And my dream leaving Frontline was to start something on my own, and wasn't quite sure what that was, but had the opportunity to start looking at what that would be.
And what was your first foray on your own?
At first, actually got together with one of my former managers from Frontline, and we were looking at, can we build an app to help people in addiction recovery? And started investigating that, started down the early development stages. Ultimately, we ended up setting that aside. He needed to move on to a different position full-time for his family. I didn't really have enough to go on my own. So after that, I joined up with another company that Mike Blackstone again and his partner were investing in called Propel. That was in the logistics, trucking and shipping logistics industry, and worked hard with a team, including Tom and some others that I'd worked with previously, to get a product ready for that business. And again, we didn't find market fit. So that lasted about a year. And I was, again, looking at what should I do next? And then that led me to where I am now at Red Rover. We started Red Rover officially in 2020. Actually, it started out not as a business, but as a project that EduStaff, a staffing company in Michigan, brought us in to work on building a absence management substitute placement system. So something in direct competition with what I had built at Frontline. And they were looking to build something out eventually we decided to spin that off as its own business, which is now Red Rover, and where I have the privilege of holding the CTO title, although CTO at a small startup can mean a whole lot of things. So I have probably 10 hats that I wear in any given week.
Chief cook, bottle washer, coder, QA.
That's right. Mounting TVs on the walls, whatever it takes. But that is really what I enjoy, is having a hand in all aspects of the business. Of course, I'm responsible for the technology, for the development team, responsible in a large part for the product and product design, but getting down into the finances, talking marketing with my business partners, all that stuff I enjoy getting my hands in and understanding. So it really is my dream job to be working and building a startup of my own.
And your old colleagues, what are they doing at Red Rover?
So Larry, who I mentioned earlier that I worked kind of hand in glove with at Frontline, was one of my co-founders. Another co-founder was in my wedding. He was one of the sales directors at Frontline in the early days. I mentioned Tom is working for me now, as well as a few others from my teams at Frontline over the years. So a lot of that knowledge of the industry and of the problem space onto the team, which has, of course, helped us get a good start. But these are also just great guys that have that attitude of solving problems for the customer, using technology to do it, being very flexible and nimble in their approach.
Now, what is your flagship product and what does it do exactly for the end users?
So Red Rover started out solving just the problem of substitute placement and absence management. So when teachers or other staff needs to take a day off, they'll register that with our system, either through the web interface or mobile app. And then many of the employees at a school district need to have a substitute when they are out, which is a little different than a lot of other industries. So our system will reach out via text message or push notification to let substitutes know, hey, there's an empty classroom. Can you fill in for John Doe today? So we're using the data supplied by the school district, the sub roles supplied by the school district, to match up those vacancies with potential subs and try and fill as many classrooms with the best educators every day.
And how big does a school system have to be before they can kind of use this system or make them a good customer for you?
We have small charter schools as small as 20 or 25 teachers. Many times the benefit they're going to see is on the notification side to notify a sub in an automated fashion, but just to track absences. And then we have districts as large as Columbus City Schools, who has over 5,000 employees and over 300 subs. So it can really range across the gamut. We can go larger than that, and then everywhere in between.
Now, I got to imagine that, like most labor markets, it's probably hard to find substitute teachers. Do you guys do anything as far as helping them identify folks that could fill those gaps?
So we don't get involved with the staff directly. Edge's staff, as I said, was the one who started the project and then spun Red Rover off. They deal with recruiting in many different markets, and school districts will often do that themselves. But yeah, there's a big sub shortage. We need more educators to get on the roles and be willing to get in schools and make sure the classrooms are filled. Our role is really just trying to identify where are those gaps and help the district administrators understand what the situation is in their school each day, and then over the long haul, what kind of recruiting efforts they need to put in to try and improve the sub situation.
And what does your tech stack look like?
So we are using React Native for the mobile app, and then we're using all serverless features from Azure, their app service, Azure SQL database. Most of the code is written in C# on the back end, TypeScript for the front end, and always looking for opportunities to use technology where it fits. I mentioned I'm not a technologist. I don't chase the technology, but I like to try and stay up on what's going on and what are the new tools that the community is bringing to the table so that we can use the ones that are the best fit for the problems we're facing.
I got to imagine you're probably texting people back and forth for availability. What are you guys using for that?
Yeah, so all of the text messaging that we're doing is going through Twilio. The push notifications are all going through Google Cloud Messaging. And we actually do have a very small interactive voice recognition phone system that teachers who are out of the range of cell service and don't have internet, yes, there are still some out there, can call and register an absence in that last minute case where they wake up sick or something along those lines. And that's done through Twilio as well.
Yeah, Twilio really revolutionized the whole telephony and texting inbound and outbound.
Yeah, the difference building a system now in 2020, 2021 versus when I first started in 2000, 2001 is just night and day. We don't have servers. I intend to let Azure manage all of that for me indefinitely. We're not worried about connecting to telephone lines or directly to carriers. There's service providers for everything from auth to messaging to email to logging, and we are 100% leveraging that cloud native architecture.
How have you found Azure to be compared with AWS or Google Cloud? I imagine being on a .NET platform kind of steered you that way. How's it been?
Yeah, exactly. We're coming from experience, most of my team experience with the .NET programming stack and SQL Server database. So Azure is a natural fit to be able to use those without a whole lot of extra effort. You can certainly use those technologies on AWS or on Google, but you have to manage a lot more of the resources. And I really wanted to go after those serverless offerings where you just upload your code and you don't have to worry about anything else. You have dials and buttons that you can scale and scale out or scale up. So that's really what steered us toward Azure. And overall, it's a great experience. Their interface is great. I know AWS is the big boy, and I've dabbled with it a little bit. Many of the things that they set up as the leader in the industry, I actually find confusing. I think they've expanded so far and so fast that some of their services could use a little bit of UX overhaul to understand how to tie things together. And I think Azure learned from that, being the second one in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree. AWS can be a bit unwieldy and focusing a lot. Actually, on a previous episode of Underserved, Jeremy Halpern said they don't really focus on solutions. They're just like, well, here's Route 53, and that's how you do DNS and blah, blah, blah. And whereas an Azure or even a Google Cloud try to make more of a solution for you to deliver.
Right. Haven't delved in the Google Cloud all that much. I'm interested in how they'll compare on things like machine learning and AI, whether AWS and Azure and Google Cloud will all kind of be commodities, or whether Google's experience in some of that data crunching will leave them out on top.
What do you do for fun when you're away from keyboard?
So I have two boys, 9 and 6, that keep me busy. As most young parents realize that your life often gets consumed outside of work with kids, and I'm no exception there. We spend a lot of time out at playgrounds and skate parks and different other activities. When I get to choose what I'm going to do, I love a good game of pickup basketball. Played basketball and soccer and baseball in high school, and always liked the physical competition as well as the business competition. And then we try at least once a year to get in a ski trip. So since junior high, my dad had been taking us out to the Rockies every year, every other year. So I've skied whole bunch of mountains in the Vale Pass, Keystone, Breckenridge, Copper, Beaver Creek, and then made some other trips up to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Big Sky, Montana. So love to get out on the slopes in the winter. I originally grew up in New Hampshire, so ski lessons was part of the winter phys ed program. And my dad was more than happy to make sure that me and my two brothers all got on skis or snowboard so that we could do that as a family.
I think you helped one of your brothers bootstrap a business with some Kickstarters, right?
Yeah, so starting all the way back in 2008, my brother, who is a graphic designer by education, started winning some t-shirt design contests on places like Threadless and Designed by Humans. And he decided, hey, wouldn't it be cool to just kind of launch an e-commerce store? Maybe we'll sell a couple hundred shirts and, see what happens. That company, Ugmonk, UGMONK, struggled to figure out how to say it. But that company started in 2008. We sold through the first 200 shirts off of the Big Cartel platform. Eventually, we moved to Shopify as Shopify came around. And then recent years have done a couple of Kickstarters for more desk organization type products. First one was Gather, which was a desk organizer. And then just this past year, we launched Analog, which is a well-designed to-do system based off index cards and process that my brother kind of designed around his workflow. And each of those raised over $400,000 on Kickstarter. We had over 2,000 backers for Analog, and that product is really doing well and driving the business forward now.
Well, that is cool. And it reminds me that we will be putting together some show notes that we will release along with the episode. We'll be sure to include some links to those Kickstarters, as well as some of the other topics that Mike has talked about during the show. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us today on this episode of Underserved.
Andrew, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll talk to everyone soon on the next episode of Underserved.
Thank you for listening to the Underserved podcast. For more information on the topics discussed and for show notes, visit the show website, underserved.fm. And please be sure to rate, like, and subscribe to Underserved on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.